So, change agents. How do you influence change? How do you become effective change agents? I guess this is the question that we're all trying to answer in the next couple of days, as we hear the many different voices, people sharing from their experiences, people sharing from learnings from their own programs. So this is a fantastic platform where I feel we create a conversation around discussing how to become change agents in our own rights. Now, I feel very privileged to be one of those voices, and often when we hear of and share of our interventions, you don't get to hear much about the change agent itself. So I'm going to tell a little bit about myself. I really hate talking about myself. I would rather hear about other people, but I think I'm going to make an exception for today, just because there's a point to this. I come from a very mixed family. I grew up with my grandparents. This is my grandfather Henry and his wife Catalina. This is his sisters and his father Albert and Sarah. Now, Albert was part British, part Tongan. Sarah was part German, part Samoan. So they spoke Samoan at home. My grandmother Catalina was part Tongan and part German, but her mother was born in Fiji, so they spoke Fijian. So my mother was Tongan, my father was a melting pot of many races, which meant that there were many, many things that we had at home that we were a subculture of the broader culture. So I inherited all the, growing up as a Tongan, I inherited all the things, all the negative traits of being a Tongan. Like I couldn't sing and dance at will, which every Pacific Islander can. But this has made me, because of my background, this has made me really interested in behavior change and in culture. And why do people do the things that they do? Why would one part of my family get really angry over one thing when the other part didn't really care much about it? So I thought that it's important that the story of a change agent is just as important as the change intervention that we talk about. So with that, we're going to move on to two programs that I played a part in. The first one will be one that I worked as a staff implementing programs on the ground. And then the other one, it's currently ongoing, so I'm really happy to be here with Melissa Collins, who's somewhere in the back. So if you see posters with the Pacific Island Food Revolution, really nice looking, delicious food posters out there, Melissa is manning our stall, which is fantastic. Sipping coconuts. Now, there's two things that you'll always find in any Pacific Island country, and one of those is coconuts, and the other, which I'll mention later, is the potholes. No one talks about those. This is the relaxing part of sipping coconuts. Don't be sipping coconuts like this, because I think that's a very stressful way of sipping coconuts. I think that's Obama, but I don't know. So I'm going to tell the program based on sipping coconuts, which is the fun part that we love to share. We always share these things. We major on it, we harp on it. We rarely ever talk about the potholes. Now, the potholes are inevitable. They're not your fault. You can't fix it. You try and avoid it, but really, sometimes you just fall into one, and some of them might be a bit too deep that even poor Jack drowned in a pothole. Yes, so sipping coconuts. This was a program, so it's called the Kau Mai Tonga Netball. Come on Tonga, let's play netball. It was a media campaign that to promote health through netball as a form of physical activity. We identified that women were at greater risk. So, I'm not going to go into the statistics of, obesity, high levels of obesity and non-communicable diseases in Tonga and in the Pacific in general. But we identified that girls and women, especially girls, once they start leaving school, they were at a lot more inactive. So they were at higher risk of the health issues that they were experiencing in Tonga. So we identified that women aged 15 to 45 were the primary target. Those who influenced their decision around physical activity were fathers, brothers, boyfriends, the male figures in their lives. And then we also identified the influences of influences. I'm going to go into how we identified those. But suffice to say, this is who we targeted. And I thought to throw in there the cost, because social marketing, mass media campaigns can cost a lot of money, and no one really likes to talk about how much something costs. So it was $3 million over 3 years funded by the Australian aid. What did we do? So I'm really happy to say that after hearing all the presenters talking about having to go out to the community, talking to people, and that kind of thing, that's exactly what we did. We went out and we spoke to basically everyone. We spoke to women who were aged 15 to 45, who were out in the community. We spoke to people who were actually doing netball. So netball at the time wasn't really that popular, but there were still some people who had played netball. We spoke to men because we knew that they would influence the choices their women were, their physical activity choices by their women, the young girls who were actually playing, and we also looked at what was available there. You can see here, this is a netball court with someone's trousers hanging on it. It goes to show that they were there, but no one really was playing the game. So we then identified from the information that we gathered 3 concepts. One was an urge, a call to action just based on fun. This is fun, come on Tonga, let's play netball. And it had a tagline, you can, I can, we can. So it was very catchy. The second concept, which is the green logo in there, was about let's play netball for health. This is something great, let's play that. And the red one is about playing netball with, the health threat behind it, where you've got a doctor saying, play netball or die, essentially. We didn't say that, but basically, that's what it was. So we storyboarded it, animated it, and the pictures at the back show having focus group discussions with, it was at a church hall or whatever big area that we could find in order to play the ads and get them the animated storyboards in order to get their feedback. It was really interesting. You can see on the top right-hand corner there, that's the logo that we actually ended up with, which meant that the feedback they gave us, we pre-tested what the script was going to be, who was going to put out the call to action, what colors we were going to use. You can see the different colors the logo shows, and also what kind of music they responded to. So this is some of the things that we ended up with. Mass media communication, it was a burst of 6 to 8 weeks. You put out an ad, but everything needed to be prepared ahead of time in order to prepare for this. Once you put the call to action out, people would then respond. So we put out posters, billboards. We even needed, if you wanted to incentivize people for a call to action, you need to have equipment there for them to use. You needed coordinated media and community activities. We even got people playing on the court. You needed to distribute all these things throughout. There's 4 island countries in Tonga, and it's not easy trying to coordinate and distribute these things. But once if things were to go on air, you needed to make sure that then the activities rolled out. So what did we achieve? There was a significant increase in people's participation, the great thing about the Pacific is there's not a lot of noise, right? Like, there's not a lot of really good quality media. So when you put something out that's really hip and fun, people respond. We didn't plan on the amount of response that we got. So we got 3,880, so in a small island of 100,000, population of 100,000, getting people together, having an event and actually 880 people was not an easy thing to do, but we managed it. The program was over 3 years, so we designed it as 3 waves. You had compared. I thought it was interesting. There's a lot of outcomes from the program, but I thought the comparison of what the waves were from the first wave to the third wave was interesting in that, because the question is always about could you sustain the impact that it was having. So it did demonstrate that there were strong positive attitudes, increased physical activity, and that there was an increased number of people who were who were being physically active in greater minutes. So it's got 30 plus minutes there because that's the recommended number of minutes. Now, what has happened since then? I've spoken about that a little bit. The effects, let's go on to the next one. So we couldn't sustain that kind of campaign. So that campaign drives demand, but it's not something that's meant to go consistently for the next 5-6 years. But what was great was the amount of demand that was there had generated or increased the supply, and now there's an ongoing work around netball. They got ongoing funding, so they were able to keep the elements, I guess the essential elements that they thought was important for them, and translate it through into the community. So it's become more of a grassroots and volunteer activity now. Now that so that's a campaign in one country. We had always wondered what it would look like if we were to translate this into a regional campaign. So that's the next one, with the Pacific Island Food Revolution. Now, the Pacific Island Food Revolution is a reality TV show. It's a communication for development program. It's delivered across Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. It's primarily supported by partnerships, but the major thing around it is the TV component. And it's a co-funding arrangement between DFAT and DFAT, so it's a fantastic opportunity for us. Now, this came about in a different way. So I've explained how things were done with the Come on Tonga, Let's Play Netball. Because this came about through a global call for ideas, so a pitch was put forward and challenges were received. Out of 280 global applications, Pacific Island Food Revolution is one of 13 winning innovations. So that was major. But it also meant that the kind of things that they did at the beginning wasn't necessarily, involved the pre-testing and that kind of stuff. And also, health had moved to look at, I'm really glad to hear what Rob was talking about with the behavioural insights. So the Pacific Island Food Revolution is really centred and focused around, so at the front, you've got the TV show, but at the back of shop, you really have a team that's working on developing the messages, understanding what the research is. How do we then tailor the messaging that we've got to put out? So what results did we achieve? We're only at the 1.5 year mark. We did a lab. We partnered with the Pusara Behavioural Economic Centre in Nairobi. We found that there was a lot of commonalities between their settings, them working in a developing context and the Pacific Islands where you might not have the systems and the technology that's available. So they were able to support putting together a lab study that demonstrated that when they were exposed to an episode like PIFA, there's 1.5 chance probability that female participants, not quite sure why particularly female, but that's how it turned out, chose a healthy Pacific option. We understood that taste and convenience were really key. Affordability and durability was there. That is, they want food that lasted longer over time, but they wanted their traditional food to be tasty and convenient. And so that's kind of a whirlwind introduction to the two programs, but the fun bits. I know I haven't got a lot of time, but these are potholes that I find in every program. You kind of fall into them, and I think they're more into the Jack falling into, that kind of big pothole thing where it swallows everything up. Diagnose properly. It's really, really hard. It's really hard to convince people to take time to diagnose properly. But you know what? It's really important. Testing your assumptions and knowing what your theory of change is and testing that theory of change. Working with a knowledgeable partner, it'll save you time and money. And a winning team is actually really, really important. You'll know further down the line when you have problems. Diagnosing properly is is one of the key things. Doing too much. Now, the program that I spoke about with the netball program, you had 2 program staff. And then volunteers. There were so many things that had to be done. It was ridiculous. I think each time I think about it, I kind of malfunction a little. But limited resources, too many activities, poorly implemented activities. We were glad that the impact was great because the effect, there was just a lot of things happening, but it didn't water down the effect too much that it wasn't that it didn't make an impact. It was still impactful at community level. In terms of media, now, shoestring budget, governments don't really understand social marketing, I find. So they always give you a shoestring budget to go by, and it's actually really, really difficult. Your increased demands requires adequate supply. It's really hard if you're driving that demand. If it's too high, when we drove the demand around netball, the netball communities actually had to be prepared for it. They had no idea what was going to hit them. So it's one thing to drive it, but you need to make sure that your supply is there as well. And coordinating media and community activities is really difficult, especially if you're in the Pacific, because you're in a complex and fragmented system. And it's just something that you need to work with. One of the things I understood was Western perception systems are structures. They're titles. In the Pacific, systems are people. You need to get to know people. Relationships matter. Your development partner priorities versus the local counterpart priorities, sometimes there's a bit of conflict there. And sometimes the local partner doesn't appreciate that. So then there's disagreement on priorities and then fragmented decision-making. Local skill and technical know-how is always an issue. There's a huge gap. If you're having to import everything in, then it just increases the cost of the things that you're doing. High quality printing materials. These are the things, if you can't find it locally, and I'm quite sure those are in the development space know this, printing and bringing everything in country is an expensive thing to do. If you want to monitor your media activities, who is going to do that? Do you have that on the ground? And of course, brain drain. I'm really sad to say I'm one of those, but I had to leave for a particular reason. But yes, brain drain. So good people actually leave the country. The last thing, you're in the Pacific. There's nothing you can do about it. It requires mental preparation. Remember, time is just a number there. They don't really care much about time. Words are not always of consequence. You can explain till you're blue in the face, but you need to show and demonstrate who you are as a person to earn their trust. So this is some of the great things I saw with Tom's presentation. Being there, being in the community, that's an important thing for them to see you. And things are bloody expensive. It's really expensive in the Pacific, so don't underquote. I guess those are some of the things I thought to bring to you and to share, and hopefully you might be inspired to go out yourself and to be the change agent. But the last thing I want to leave you with, which is the point of why I went through the painful process of sharing about my background, is you need to consider you. Remember, when you do your programs, know who you are, know what your biases are, your assumptions, your heuristics. When you go out to the communities that you go out to, you need to be prepared for the kind of things that you don't see. So think twice about everything that you do as a person. And thank you.